I know it's only Wednesday, but it has already been a long week on the Psychopaths in Government Watch Beat, which Brad and I are dedicated to. We try to stay on top of it. And this week, Justin Trudeau decided, he's the Canadian Prime Minister, and he decided that he just wants to become a full-on villain and has been going to town trying to use emergency powers in Canada to undermine the very successful protest movement by the truckers there. Brad, I think you have more of the details, but this is scandalous. I am outraged over what's happening in Canada.
Yeah, unfortunately, Justin Trudeau is no longer hot.
No. Well, I want to submit that while he has a pretty face, he has chosen to waste it all along. He's never been hot because of how he acts. You have to act base to be hot. That is the main criteria.
I think he's pretty regardless, to be honest. He's a very good-looking guy.
So on Kennedy a few weeks ago, I said that he was a waste of a pretty face and that he could have been hot had he chosen to act differently. But somebody commented on that clip and said that Justin Trudeau looks like a Cabbage Patch doll. And now I can't get it out of my head. Every time I see him, he does look like a Cabbage Patch doll, which, Brad, I don't know if you know what a Cabbage Patch doll looks like. They probably were gone. I do. Okay, but I have one, and he looks just like it.
What he increasingly reminds me of is not a Cabbage Patch doll, but Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars. So first, I'm going to play for you guys, so what Hannah already queued this up, but a little bit more of the details. This week, Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act, supposedly to keep Canadians safe, which will, according to the Wall Street Journal, allow him to limit public gatherings in a bid to end disruptive demonstrations in the capital city and along the Canada-U.S. border. He is actually declaring an emergency and invoking all these expanded powers. Take a listen to what he had to say.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations. This is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting people's jobs, and restoring confidence in our institutions.
So they always do this. Whenever they're doing an emergency power grab, they say, for your safety, for your safety. And the Canadian Civil Liberties Association came out against the government's decision on Monday, saying the standard for invoking the Emergencies Act has not been met. The act exists for situations that seriously threaten the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and that cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. Obviously, that is not what some protesting truckers are doing, right? This is supposed to be for like an invasion or something. So I'm just reminded of this Star Wars clip. For folks that don't know, Chancellor Palpatine took emergency powers, citing the danger of the separatist movement. And guess what? That emergency never ended, and he declared himself emperor for life. Take a listen.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
So Hannah, I know you're not a huge Star Wars fan, but tell me those two vibes aren't pretty much the same.
Yeah, he's definitely in the same territory here. And I think this is really disgusting. This is why government should never get emergency powers. You get these powers, very limited, very defined, and that's it. There's no emergency where you ever get to trample over people's civil liberties and rights. And nobody supporting this kind of action can ever claim to be pro-democracy ever again, because protesting is one of the most essential functions in a representative government. It is absolutely unacceptable. It's so important. Our founders enshrined it in the First Amendment. It is how you petition. It's how you change things. And I've heard this like very eerie talking point from many talking heads on the left recently where they say, oh, you just have to wait for elections and vote these people out. And but that was not their energy under BLM protests, let's keep in mind. But secondarily, they're saying, oh, you should just wait, elections have consequences, vote them out. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is appropriate to vote people out at those given points, but you don't just have to sit there and take it for 2 to 4 years until you get the next chance to vote these psychos out. No, protesting is how we affect change. It actually, I'll say this over and over until I'm blue in the face, has found to be the most effective way of actually achieving political change. Nonviolent civil disobedience, protesting, is how you get things done. It's how you rally people to your cause. It's how you continue to impact the government off when we're not in election year, and it's so vitally essential. So to see them really come in and clamp down and try to actually turn people into criminals, try to actually take their resources, try to actually use the might of government to clamp down on this is eerie and authoritarian. And you don't get to claim to be anything other than a fascist if you're behaving like this.
So I have a question for you, Hannah, because we might actually disagree about this a little bit. I don't know. I'm very much with these protesters. I'm against the mandates. I think they should just get rid of the mandates. They can all go home. But I said this about BLM, and I also said this about the so-called Extinction Rebellion, the crazy climate protesters here in D.C. I really don't think protesters have a right to block bridges or block road traffic. I think when they start doing that, they're crossing the line from peaceful protest into actually violating the rights of others and their freedom of movement. When an ambulance can't get through, when you can't get to your job because of people's demonstrations. So I do know that in a few instances, the Canadian protesters have gone and done that, and that's something I'm not really okay with, but I'm wondering, I know you're a civil disobedience fan, but what do you think about blocking traffic?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting dispute because I probably am a bit more in favor of protesting than you are. I think we kind of were a little on different, we agreed on a lot of the BLM stuff, but I was a little bit more pro those rallies than you were, and I think in this situation, I'm still like, I don't mind. Again, civil disobedience, I think, should disrupt, should be inconvenient, should get people's attention. But I also think that it is law enforcement's job to carve out, like, they should keep one lane of traffic open, like we're keeping this open for ambulances. That's the kind of thing that they should actually be doing for their jobs, allow people to protest, but make sure that other people can still get their basic needs met. So I am sympathetic to the idea that blocking roadways could prevent somebody who is dying from getting to a hospital. I do think that's unacceptable. But I also think there are ways of dealing with that and ensuring that certain routes are kept open so that doesn't happen while still allowing people to protest. And we don't really see that kind of energy from law enforcement or governments. They instead try to just come and shut down the entirety of the protest, and that's wrong.
Well, and that's what Trudeau's doing, to get us back to the topic, is he's literally invoking these emergency powers to expand the ability of police to just arrest and fine people at will, right? Take a listen to this part.
The police will be given more tools to restore order in places where public assemblies can constitute illegal and dangerous activities, such as blockades and occupations, as seen in Ottawa, the Ambassador Bridge, and elsewhere. These tools include strengthening their ability to impose fines or imprisonment.
So, Hannah, we have literally already seen, before these emergency powers, clips of Canadian police beating 80-year-old men and throwing them to the ground at these protests. And now, thanks to Trudeau, we're going to have more police powers. That can only make this situation much better, right?
Nothing is ever solved by giving police more power or more ability to ticket, fine, and arrest people. I think this is highly problematic. One, it's important for people to know, like, that's a lot of your money being wasted for taxpayers because all they're doing is spending resources that should be going to actually solving violent crime on harassing people who are trying to peacefully protest. It's not acceptable, leads to lots of wrongful convictions, lots of abuse within the system. We've seen this in America as well. So I'm never in favor of police having more power. They have more than enough as it is. I think this is going to lead to serious civil rights abuses. And we've already seen that in Canada. We've seen the police acting out in these circumstances. We've seen them actually beating elderly citizens. We have seen them seizing firewood from protesters who are merely trying to keep themselves warm, seizing their gasoline. This is totally unacceptable, and I think it should frighten people that this is where their government goes. It's saying essentially we're giving the police the ability to abuse you and persecute you with abandon because you're protesting. Again, this is fascism.
Yeah, look, I certainly don't think the police need any powers. My view is that when there are instances of, like, ambulances can't get through or whatever, law enforcement already have plenty of power and resources to deal with that as is appropriate. so they don't need expanded emergency powers to deal with some protests about freedom and against mandates. But the flip side, that's kind of the traditional authoritarianism that Trudeau is doing. On the other side, they've got this kind of newfangled big tech, big government, fusionist financial censorship angle that they're going for. So I'm going to play a quick clip of Trudeau and also of the Canadian finance minister explaining how they're invoking the Emergency Act to go after the ability of people to fundraise or use crypto or use fundraising websites in favor of these freedom protesters because they have ideas that the government of Canada doesn't like, so they're going to financially censor them. Take a listen.
As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order. In doing so, they will be protected against civil liability for actions taken in good faith. Federal government institutions will have a new broad authority to share relevant information with banks and other financial service providers to ensure that we can all work together to put a stop to the funding of these illegal blockades.
Now, folks might remember that I talked about why Bitcoin is so important because it's not centralized and no government can control it, as opposed to normal currency and this kind of thing. And all I'm going to say is I told you so.
You did. You were so. This entire past 2 days, I've just been thinking like Brad was really onto something last week. I'm buying Bitcoin. I'm now tweeting about buying Bitcoin. I'm getting over that hump of like being supportive to being like really all in because this is very scary. It's very frightening. We have to find ways to ensure that they can't seize our currency and take our money and resources when they don't like the behavior of citizens. This is something that I know a lot of civil libertarians and people who are just interested in kind of dystopian futures think about a lot. This is something I've heard people worrying about since I was a kid, actually, even in like Christian circles. This might be a little bit off subject, but like they'll often talk about the mark of the beast, right? This is this big thing in Revelations that terrified me to death when I was a kid, but essentially where they say when the end of the world comes, there will be this Antichrist, and what will he do? He's going to make it where you have to have a mark to be able to buy and sell things, and that's something that a lot of kids are taught growing up in evangelical circles. So like this is something that people have worried about in various sectors for some time, long before it actually came to pass. But right now, we're kind of starting to see it come to pass, right? You have to have a vaccine to participate in commerce in a lot of places. You now have to basically act as the government wants you to act and not protest its rules, or they're going to seize your bank accounts and try to influence financial institutions to cut you off from your money and your resources. I think it should terrify everyone. I think this is why people have been so afraid of a cashless society. And I think that it's time for us to make sure that we're really putting our resources into building up ways to ensure that they won't be successful in this, because we see that the urges are there in multiple first world Western countries. And I think that, you know, for me, growing up, learning about all the human rights abuses that occurred during World War II, learning about all the treaties, all the, you know, kind of times we came together in the United Nations to try to ensure these kinds of violations never happen again. And these are our standards of ethics. And these are the things you're not going to do. We consistently see those things being violated, and supported by large portions of the population and by people in both parties. That's terrifying. We have to start making sure that we are protecting civil liberties, that we don't ever see some of these horrific things that have happened in history occur again.
Yeah, and the thing about that people need to understand is I'm not anti-banks and I'm not anti-GoFundMe or anything. Like, they're private companies, sort of, but the problem with them is that they're centralized. So the government can go to GoFundMe and say, you're not allowed to give the money to those Canadian protesters. They can literally stop them. There's a centralized point of control where the government can come in and commit financial censorship or heavily pressure the company to do it on its behalf. The thing about Bitcoin and some other cryptocurrencies is that they're decentralized through something called a blockchain. You don't really need to worry about what the complicated technology of it all is, but simply understand that there is no Bitcoin HQ. There is no company that controls the supply of Bitcoin, that controls who can access and trade Bitcoin. It is decentralized across thousands or maybe even millions of different users who are coming together to make the network work. So if the government tries to really crack down on crypto or ban Bitcoin or anything, it almost really can't, because there is no place to go to shut off the valve. There's no one way to stop it. Now, the one exception to that potentially is cryptocurrency exchanges like Coinbase or some of these websites that facilitate it for you. So if you want to be completely free of any centralized pressure, you do need to have your own keys and your own storage separate from these kind of mainstream platforms. But that's actually not that hard to do, and many people have done that. So the promise of Bitcoin and crypto is that it gives us a way to opt out of a centralized currency system, not just to hedge us against inflation, which is great, but also to prevent this kind of newfangled dystopian digital financial censorship that I find so alarming. I mean, because they're starting to debank people. They're starting to cancel people for their opinions and try to take them off. The big banks and big government are in bed together, and it's scary stuff, Hannah.
Yeah, it is quite frightening. And I think you're absolutely right about kind of trying to distinguish what is free market, what are private businesses, and what is not. When it comes to things like banking, it's become so intertwined with the U.S. government. There's so few places you could go to actually be free of that. I know some people have started turning to like credit unions and trying to find ways outside of the mainstream with banking, but still, I think crypto increasingly seems to be like the direction we need to head to make sure that we are cutting ourselves off, opting out of this policy and out of this currency. Because you and I were talking about this when I was in D.C. the other week about how do we ever actually get control of the Federal Reserve, right? We all know, anybody who knows anything knows that the problems with our currency and inflation and all of these things trace back to the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is this weird, like, not totally public entity where we don't have a lot of control over them. Congress doesn't have a lot of control over them. And so really being able to ever affect public policy to the point where we could see meaningful difference come out of the Fed and how they operate, to me feels like a pipe dream. It feels totally like out of reach. And I'm a pretty optimistic person when it comes to affecting political change. But you have
after our conversation about that, I had a conversation with a policy expert about this. And what he said is that Congress could reassert authority over the Fed. It's kind of like war powers. It's something where they used to have power and then they gave it away and delegated it away. But Congress could change the Federal Reserve Act and reassert its authority and really rein in the Fed. Now, it's still kind of a pipe dream because that would require Congress having a spine.
Yeah, it's like them actually making us declare war again before we go to war. So, I mean, that's a little more hopeful than where I was at when you and I talked, because I wasn't really sure Congress actually even had the authority to totally come in and change the structure of things. So, I mean, I guess it's not totally outside the realm of possibility, but it's far-fetched when you really look at trying to affect public change.
With this Congress.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a lot of public policy done at the state level and the local level, and I still think there's a tremendous opportunity there. But when it comes to passing anything federally, it's a tremendous amount of resources and pressure and organizing, and it's just hard to do. And when it comes to things that big, Congress has no spines, and mostly they're just really uneducated people when you get there. I mean, they aren't really the policy wonks you would hope to have at the federal level that are really trying to seek new ways of reforming how things are done and figure it out. They're kind of just there to do the status quo.
You're telling me that AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene aren't policy wonks?
You know, they're not the stalwarts of economic theory and public policy that you would hope to have representing people at that level, not by a long shot. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of people in both parties who really, truly are public policy wonks and intrinsically and deeply understand the things they're voting on and trying to structure. Few and far between. So when it comes to getting out from underneath the Federal Reserve, this is the direction we need to go. I'm starting to really restructure my investments and starting to look at this more seriously, and I think other people should too. And this Canada thing should really freak people out. I mean, honestly, like, it is right across our border. It's so close. We're often like kind of in the same, category when it comes to Canada. Like, obviously Canada's worse than us, but they're seen as being one of the more free representative type government situations, and watching them spiral like this is frightening, and it just reminds you how close it is to our borders and how easily it can happen here.
Yeah, I want to touch on one more point about Trudeau before we move on, which is that I want to give the devil his due here and play a clip of him explaining why what he's doing with the Emergencies Act is not authoritarian. Take a listen, Hannah.
Let me be equally clear about what it does not do. We're not using the Emergencies Act to call in the military. We're not suspending fundamental rights or overriding the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are not limiting people's freedom of speech. We are not limiting freedom of peaceful assembly. We are not preventing people from exercising their right to protest legally. We are reinforcing the principles, values, and institutions that keep all Canadians free.
So I am not very convinced by his reassurances that our freedom is not in jeopardy, and here's part of why. I want to play a flashback clip from a few years ago where Trudeau literally admitted that he admires Chinese dictatorship.
Even with Sun TV watching for any slip, he was asked which country he most admired and referred to China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green as fast as we need to start, investing in solar. I mean, there is a flexibility that I know Stephen Harper must dream about, of having a dictatorship that he could do everything he wanted, that I find quite interesting.
Hannah, do you believe him that everything's going to be fine and he's not going to touch our freedoms?
Yikes. Honestly, that is a terrifying clip. And the way he's just laughing about it. So too, I just think it's so great they use this authoritarian power. TV. What? How have I not seen this clip before? That just shows you the media is not doing their job. People should have known about this long ago. But I'm not surprised. He's somebody who clearly is drunk on his own power, who doesn't see any problem with power as long as it's in his hands. And he's fantasizing about how China can come in and basically override all of these laws that they have and push in for green climate policy is what he says. So he has these fascinations about being able to do that to affect better green policy. It's if somebody wants to override your basic liberties and fantasizes about that to get climate change policies in place, that person might be unhinged. That might be somebody you should be worried about, because that means
you might not want to give them emergency powers.
Yeah. Maybe it's a bad idea to give them an exception to the checks on their power. What a terrifying situation. Not hot. Justin Trudeau, not hot. He's going on the not hot board at base brief. That's for sure.
He's still kind of a snack, though.
He's going over there with Josh Hawley, and you can get over it.